But I'm glad you're taking the time to do this with us. As you know, we're interviewing the revisionists of the past years who actually started out in the movement years ago, and you'll be the fourth one. We already interviewed Fred Luchter, and we did Robert Farrason. Now yesterday or the other day we did, I don't know if you saw the video, but we just did the video with Germar Rudolph. So
is it up already?
Yes, I already put that up, and that's ready to go. It's on my my YouTube site, which is the League of Extraordinary Revisionists. So it is there. We could send you the link to it, later. I don't remember if we sent it to you because I just put it up. So I've been getting it up, these videos up in the last day. So anyway, so you are the fourth, and we hope to interview some more people. But having Skype here does make it a little easier for us. So at least we don't have to go traveling. But the last one I did with Robert Farrason, my Skype wasn't working right, and I actually had to do it with my cell phone. That was all done with a cell phone. Can you believe it?
No.
Yeah.
That was amazing that it came out so clear.
Yeah, well, it worked out. I mean, I had to put the cell phone down, and I had to come in through a monitor, and I recorded off the monitor. It was a first for me, and it worked. This will be better because I can see better on this because I'm not looking into a little phone. So anyway, but anyway, we have some questions for you, and what I would like to know, I was watching a video with you and Ernst Zundel the other day, and it was an excellent video. I learned a lot about you, but I want you to speak and talk about your life, and I want you to start off first of all, from the beginning, just giving us some background. Before you even got into the revisionist movement, what your life was about, and what were you doing before you even got into it, and then we're going to get into, just go with the flow and talk to us how you got into the movement, the revisionist movement, and what happened to you. I mean, it's your floor. If I have questions that come up in my mind, I will answer them. But again, I want you to cover whatever you want to cover that you think is important. Okay, so if you want to start off from the beginning, telling us about your background. And how things were with you way in the beginning when you in life, in your life.
Thank you, Jim. The beginning of my so-called revisionist journey is captured in a video that was recorded in 1997 at Ernst Zundel's home. And there it was my first interview, and I was really fresh on the job. And anyone who's interested, perhaps we'll have a link to that interview, because there the theoretical basis of what drove me into questioning Matter's Holocaust are laid there. But personally, I think if you look at Wikipedia, there is a basic sketch about my beginnings, my outline, but unfortunately I'm trying to augment what's on Wikipedia, and it's impossible. I've been blocked now because there's so many inaccuracies mentioned in that brief sketch, and I'm trying to clarify, and they won't let me in. They have these guards. And so I don't know. They in one clip or in one notice about Adelaide Institute, they state that I am a convicted Holocaust denier. Now this is not true. And I wanted to clarify this, and I said I may have to litigate on this. So that was the ground why I have been locked out of Wikipedia, because anyone who threatens legal action gets locked out. So I haven't had time to pursue this, because in the alternate media that the revisionists have at their disposal, we don't really have to worry what Wikipedia does. But certainly a libel, defamation or slander, whatever you want to call it, is rife in Wikipedia. and it's very difficult to then change or augment what is there and correct the record. For example, I went to Google's in Sydney, and I wanted to see someone. You can't see anybody. Right. Yet, when the Executive Council of Australian Jewry rings up Google or YouTube at that time and complains about my YouTube channel, then automatically they react and I'm banned. Mm-hmm. And so this is what we're fighting against. Right. It's that kind of power battle that we have. And I can look back then, if you worry about this power concept, you then go back to your childhood and you realize that it's nothing new. It's called, I've called it the battle of the wills. Right. It starts when you're a little kiddie, how your mother and father discipline you. And this then enables you to understand. As a teacher, I used to hear old seasoned teachers say, look, you have to smack the brains from the bottom into the head. Mm-hmm. With some of the children. Yeah. So of course, once we start on that, we start on discipline. What happens? And then I go back to my childhood. I was born in Germany in 1944, 2nd of June, and I think it was near the end of the war, of course, 1944. I wouldn't have known anything about it, but certainly in the first 10 years that I was in Germany, on a farm, my father and mother, we were farmers, and we didn't hear much about the war. Sometimes we would see individuals riding on bikes. They would have an armband, or they would have only one leg. They were then the victims of war that came through. Or we had on the farm, we would have a whole batch of refugees coming through, German refugees. Mm-hmm. But only afterwards would we make sense of what happened. Because in 1953, 9 years after I was born, we had this Australian serviceman, ex-serviceman and later on, but he was with the British Army, and they were recruiting people for Australia or Canada or even South Africa. And they wanted farmers. So my father was invited to come, and we, well, now looking back on it, we see that we were, our parents invited us into the discussion because we had a globe of the world, and I remember father pointing to Canada up there and Australia down there, yeah, and South Africa next to it. And in any case, what happened was that our parents decided to go to Australia. But only on a temporary basis. I think father leased the farm, for about 10 years or 12 years, just in case that he wanted to come back. And what happened was, of course, we packed up the whole household. We had, at that time, there were no containers, but we had 2 huge crates full of household goods, everything, including the motorbike, including the bikes, including everything. And father went from Jade, Kreuzmoor, where we lived, to Stuttgart, and he got himself a brand new Mercedes as well. So with that, 2 containers and each child, 4 children, we had 2 suitcases as well. We then, on the Scalbreen in October, we set off for Australia. And in 1954, in 1954, October. And so then I still remember now how we were then put in a camp we arrived in Melbourne, or firstly in Perth or in Fremantle. We docked, that's in Western Australia. We walked around, we could walk around for a day. What impressed us was that all households had milk bottles outside their doors and money next to it. I mean, this was astounding.
Yeah.
You saw these milk bottles. Well, what's happened? Well, the milkie came during the day and then picked up the money, or usually early morning. But certainly the bottle was put out at night and nobody was thieving.
Right.
There's no theft. It's amazing to hear this kind of stuff or think about it,
Right.
because nowadays this would be totally impossible.
Right.
So from Melbourne we went to Bonegilla. That was a camp on the Murray River between New South Wales and Victoria, the state of New South Wales and Victoria. And from there, then individuals came, and very much like our Minister for Immigration, he went to Jordan and selected about 12,000 refugees. Well, it was sort of like that for us, because a farmer selected us, and father worked on the farm for a little while, and then something happened, and then we moved on from one farm to the other, because father's dream and his promise was that he could be a big farmer, lots of land in Australia. But what they didn't tell him was that it's all occupied.
Yeah.
You couldn't just go in there and get the farm. So what happened? After 2 or 3 moves, we settled in Macedon in Victoria. He got a 50-acre block. There was a house, or 60-acre block. There was a house and a horse shed. And this horse shed he turned into a beautiful home. And then for 5 years, he travelled from there to Melbourne into the factory, because these migrants were actually not designed for independent work as such, but they needed workers for the factories. Mm-hmm. And my father was at General Motors for 5 years, and my mother for 4 years in a plastics factory. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning. While we were going through school, they had to travel up and down 37 miles there and 37 miles back. But luckily they had a nice car, a Mercedes.
There you go. Yeah. Good driver, yeah.
So that is sort of the beginning, that we had the stability for the school, that we were not torn apart like, well, very often nowadays what happens is 2 parents both have to work as well, and the children, when they're small, even when they're 1 or 2 years, they already go to creche and so on, they lose that ability to be bonding with their parents. Right. They bond with strangers.
Sure, yeah.
Now, to me, that is sad, because we didn't have that. We had our bonding with our parents was, in some respects, oppressive.
Right.
Especially in the secondary school, in the primary school, we had ex-soldiers who came back as teachers. They didn't mind us that we had a German background, because, there were times where we couldn't understand English. We went to the Jade, Private Oberschule Jade, which is now in Jadeberg, but we learned only a few weeks of English, and then we came out to Australia. So we didn't know the difference between who and where. For example, a little thing like our neighbor, his name was Jimmy, so I would say, who is Jimmy? Instead of where is Jimmy?
Oh, I see, yeah.
And so people would say, point their finger at, there, Jimmy's there. So slowly we learnt the language. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have this nonsense that we have today, where we have English as a second language in schools, where the immigrants learn proper English with grammar, with spelling, while the native Australians, they just coast along. And you can tell the difference then. The immigrant has an educated English, while the ordinary Australian who doesn't bother is almost illiterate.
Huh.
And that I still think it's a design, and I clashed badly when I was a teacher of English about these things. But I was going to just mention briefly how the battle of the wills came through again when we went to secondary school. We were the Germans and the Nazis. We didn't know what Nazis were, but at least they said, you are Nazis. Oh, I see. And then, of course, it was fisticuffs. Mm-hmm. And luckily, we were strong enough physically to give them, to stand up
defend
to
yourself,
our own and confront them. Yes,
right.
We didn't run away.
Right.
And then the ones we fought with in year 7, in year 8 and 9, we became friends with them. Mm-hmm. Because what we also did was to adapt. We adapted. Mm-hmm. And we blended in. We became just as, in some respects, just as lazy as the homegrown product about schooling. Right. We went to government school. But luckily, in the last year, I pulled through and I, woke up to myself having failed. I only fail when I don't work. Right. And so this time, I came through and got Commonwealth scholarship and studentship and so on. But it meant that we had to focus, we had to really work hard, because the government system, in contrast to the German system, is just the opposite. In the Anglo-Australian system, the school is very slack from beginning up to year 11 or 12. In year 11, the students are separated for those who will become academic or not. And if they don't become academic, they'll even push them through to year 12, and that's it. But in Germany, you get tight from infancy right through to year 12 to the Abitur. And once you've got the Abitur, you're free to go. You can do anything. The university is then your field. You can do what you like.
Right.
And in some respects, that enables an individual to do more independent thinking, because you've got the instruments of intellectual work, of brain work at your hand. You can spell properly, you can read, you can write, you can do all those things. Mm-hmm. While in our society, universities here have bridging courses for illiterate students.
Wow. At
university level.
Wow.
In maths and science, they have that in America too, don't they?
Well, I really don't know, but I don't doubt it. I mean, by the time kids get to the colleges and things, a lot of them don't really know a lot. So I probably would say that's true. That probably is true.
Then I certainly say, hey, that's a retrograde step. I'll come on to that later on when we discuss the actual court cases. But at one stage, Mrs. Olga Scully and I were before the Human Rights Commission, and we walked out in protest. We asked the commissioner, is truth a defense in these proceedings? And she said, and I actually said, don't pussyfoot about. Tell me, can I defend myself in these proceedings before the Human Rights Commission by telling the truth? No answer. And this means if you're in a proceeding where you're being accused of something, in defamation, it's easy. Defamation, there's always, if the statement made about you and you're complaining about it, but if it's true, then that's your defense.
Right. Yeah.
But in these these wishy-washy, watered-down defamation cases that now come under the Racial Discrimination Act, as it does in Australia and in Canada. Arthur Topham's the prime example. Same thing, or Ed Sundell.
Right.
Then we are in trouble. Some fundamental, basic principle of our culture has been taken away. That's a degeneration.
Right.
It is not an improvement.
Right. Well, let me ask you this: when how did you? So you were a philosopher teacher, right? You taught philosophy in school.
I taught English, sociology, philosophy.
Okay.
And in my first beginnings, usually when you come into school, you teach everything. You teach math, science, everything.
Yeah. All right. So
even cookery.
Okay. So how did you get into the revisionist movement then from there?
Well, again, this is where I have to focus on my final 2 years of teaching in Victoria, where in '84 I was considered to be an incompetent teacher. And we're in a small country town, but that is all in my book, The Boston Curry Party. So I won't elaborate on that. I'll just say to you, read my book.
Okay.
It's available on the internet on my website, toben.biz, and it can be read. But what I've got out of that 2 years where I was being gunned for and then declared incompetent and disobedient, is I realized the battle of the wills, again, this battle of the wills is a normal kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's a normal thing. And I came across, while I was being sort of hounded out of school, and if you don't let yourself be hounded out by the principal, you then get dismissed.
Okay.
And they had a marvelous procedure in which they did it. But if I may, I've got the this Sir Douglas Wright was an academic who worked on the Sydney Sparks ore case. This was an academic in the 60s who, at the University of Tasmania, was up on a charge of, I think it was beginnings of sexual harassment or something like that, and he was dismissed. So he fought the dismissal, but it stood ultimately because an employer is permitted to dismiss for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. In fact, this is another matter about legal procedures. A bureaucracy in Australia, a Director General, for example, doesn't have to give reasons for actions that he undertakes. Michael Kirby at one time on the High Court, he advised me on this. It was marvelous what he did. He said he was pushing hard to get it enshrined in law that a bureaucracy must give reasons for decisions. Mm-hmm. He was defeated, and he couldn't get through this matter. Very few people know that. Mm. In other words, you can be dismissed. Now, in my case, I was dismissed. They had a good case, except I was given a hearing. And the hearing, and they mentioned that in documentations when I contested this, they said, you were given a right of reply. In other words, if somebody says something to you, then natural law kicks in, which means that you can be given or must be given a right of reply. So they said, oh, you were given a right of reply, you had this hearing. And luckily, I had secretly recorded that hearing, and later in the court case, the Director General admitted that the transcript of this secret recording was true. In other words, I was not given a right of reply, because he just brushed it off, and he just said, just give me a reason why I shouldn't dismiss you, and so on. So I was lucky because I knew the mechanism which is universal, which is in all societies, the elimination mechanism. And you start off with, you defame the victim's professional competence, mental balance, and truthfulness. These are the main three items. You defame. Then you reward the collaborators from the victim's group. Then next, number 4, proclaim the authority of the corporation or the education department in this case. Then what you do, number 5, that's the big one, spread defamation through the victim's personal links and loyalties. So what you do is, you look at the revisionists who've been knocked over, Fred Leuchter. You spread defamation through the victim's personal links and loyalties. They got him that way. Then Robert Forrison, same thing, with his academic environment.
Yeah.
Then Ernst Zundel is the prime example, of course. He's the pioneer in this.
Yeah.
Dietlib Phil and others. We've got the examples where the victims are actually defamed some more through the media and through their personal links. And you'll find, in time, they drop off. Unfortunately, my group, I had the local community, they were behind me because I went to school with the parents whose kids I taught. Yeah. I went to school with them. They knew of Fred.
Right.
You know, and so then the principal and the other teachers had to leave. They were the ones who had to leave. But I was gone. And certainly when I won my dismissal against the education department 4 or 5 years later, I was not to be employed again. So let me just go through. There are 11 points. Perhaps you can put them up. I don't know. Number 6 is isolate the victim by giving him the silent treatment. Then, number 7, usually this leads, once given the silent treatment, leads the victim's resignation, which is taken as proof of guilt. Dismissal occurs if the victim refuses to resign. And of course, that was my case. I refused to resign. They offered me a transfer, and I said, oh, look, why don't you put it in writing? Oh, we couldn't do that. I said, you shonks. Just a hearsay, no.
Yeah.
Because on my file, on my personal file, there was already the inquiry report. The fellow who wrote that up with the union representative, he was told 6 months later what really happened, that this was a personality conflict, this was a local conflict. The education department tried to close the school down for 10 years already. And we came in and we livened it up. And the man who wrote this inquiry report, Jim Cleland, he died 6 months later. Because a former school council president went to him and said, listen, you stuffed up. Toben is not guilty. And so in April, can you imagine, in April 85, we had the centenary of education at Garogue. I did the book, and I was at school. The dismissed teacher, the bus driver now, was sitting at a desk and when this celebration occurred, and I was selling the books. I mean, it was tough for the others. And I didn't feel guilty. I thought I was doing a marvelous job for the community.
Right.
And then later on, in 87, we had Our Heritage. Brenda Dickinson, she wrote a play, a musical, and I turned that into a book. And of course, by this time I was a tutor at Deakin University, now Warrnambool Institute, and tutoring sociology, and that got into the newspaper, that I was a tutor, and I was a publisher. And I started Peace Books, which has been going now since 1986, yeah. So when I got thrown out, I didn't stop. I didn't mind driving the school bus. A number of individuals said, well, that's a bit of a letdown, that's a bit of a downturn. I said, no, why? What's wrong with that? Nothing wrong. I got the accolade of being the most highly qualified school bus driver in Australia. But, and so the other point is that once I won my case against the dismissal, I was able to register as a teacher in South Australia, the state next door to Victoria. And that brings a very interesting point with it, because it leads to point 8. A strong victim highlights the moral standards of society. So this is where my maxim comes in. Don't only blame the Jews, also blame those that bend to their pressure. There are people who blame the Jews for everything. That's nonsense.
Right.
Absolute nonsense. But I can blame the Jewish community in Australia for having got up Section 18C in Australia that is similar to the Canadian section, what is it? The law under which Arthur Topham's gone, it's Section 319 of the Criminal Code in Canada, where truth doesn't defend you, it's a hurt feeling.
Right.
So, in other words, you have to have a moral code, a basic moral principle, or principles that you have to have if you want to be a teacher, to set an example to your students.
Yeah.
You've got to set an example to your students.
Right.
Otherwise, we had teachers who wanted to grow old disgracefully, and they were puffing away with the students and everything.
Right.
And that didn't go down well with me anyway.
Yeah.
So then next, number 9, people in authority perpetuate their own types because no one wishes to be shamed by a successor. That's very often the case, that you perpetuate your own kind. If you do not want, for example, my principal at Eden High School, he became the education staffing officer in Victoria, and that's why I got the job, because he knew me. He knew Fred was harmless. He was a good boy,
right.
And he worked hard. and so when he resigned, I didn't have any backing in the department anymore, because then the Labour Party, the Union Labour Party, came in, and they had a different program. They watered down education massively. So let me just, sorry about this, but it's getting long. But number 10, employees are as courageous as their security of livelihood and reputation permits. Now, this is a fundamental. There are some people who are cowards and gutless and so on. It's not true. Self-preservation comes in. There are many, many millions of people who share our viewpoint, the revisionist viewpoint about the Holocaust, but they dare not say anything because they have to support the family, they have to keep their job, and at the moment the pressure is too great, right. Far too great, and so they remain silent. Mm-hmm. We see this in other spheres, for example, in Europe at the moment with the immigrant influx, that most people are do-gooders, they want to help. Who doesn't want to help? Mm-hmm. But if it leads to self-destruction of a people, then you have to worry about that kind of altruism where it's actually a suicide.
Right.
So the final point, Jim, is a governing body of an institution devoted to truth and justice is corrupt if it obstructs inquiry into its stewardship. That's the final point, and that was my lifesaver, because truth and justice is a fundamental also in law. Right. In British common law and just in common law generally, and I think you've got that too, we have moral, social, and legal duties, as we have moral, social, and legal rights. Mm-hmm. Now, these are all subverted. These basic principles we don't talk about anymore. We don't have civics in school. Right. We don't get taught how governments operate. How does government operate? Oh, one student once said to me, "Oh, it's an opinion poll. Mm-hmm. The government is operated by opinion polls."
Right.
Well, then we've got problems.
Yeah.
Opinion polls, that's not the people's voice.
Right. That's
not what the individuals want. And as I said before, our democracy in Australia has reached the point where it doesn't matter what we vote. Right. The only freedom we have is the freedom to go shopping.
Right.
And And so, and that's very important, the consumer society.
Right.
But there are individuals who do have basic values, and especially those who are still raising children and who are worried about our own well-being, that we do have that freedom to ask questions. This is what democracy is all about. Adelaide Institute's website has testing the limits of democracy.
Right.
This is what we're on about, to push as much as possible that we can ask questions, even if it's, well, nowadays it's considered to be racist.
Sure.
And I mean, the problem, I'm just looking at the, I had 12 court cases in the federal court in Australia with the Executive Council of Australian Jury. They were never labelled vexatious litigants by going for me all the time. Oh no. And on top of that, I had to then pay their legal costs for these since 96. It was about $250,000.
Wow.
So you can't do much with that.
Are you still fighting in legal cases now? Are you still being taken to court now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have the final one, and that's a defamation action. And 9 months ago, the other side, the Australian, the Murdoch paper, and the Senator Christine Milne, they decided that I was abusing the court's processes by launching a defamation action.
Huh.
So my imputations, the Australian and Senator Milne called me an anti-Semite, a Holocaust denier, and a fabricator of history.
Yeah.
And these three terms are defamatory.
Right.
And so we had a hearing on the 4th and 5th of February this year. The decision hasn't been handed down, and so we're just waiting.
Yeah.
And so at the moment I shouldn't say any more about it. But these are the three concepts: that I'm a fabricator, that I'm a Holocaust denier, and an anti-Semite.
Well, what happens if they found you guilty? What happens? How much time would you get?
No, I then lose my defamation action against them,
Oh.
and it'll be like very similar to what happened to Irving. He put this action on Professor Deborah Lipstadt, and the judge found that he was an anti-Semite, a racist, and a Holocaust denier.
Yeah.
So you see, the problem is in these defamation actions, at least the terms, or before that, in the other legal actions, these terms are never defined.
Right.
For example, Wikipedia says I'm a convicted Holocaust denier, but I'm not. I was convicted in Germany for defaming the memory of the dead.
Right.
But that does not mean that I was, and it's going to appeal, but now the whole action has been stayed.
Yeah.
Indefinitely. If I return to Germany, of course, they'll reactivate it.
Right.
But the point is, the important thing is that the Holocaust material is then run in the newspapers as a matter of fact.
Right.
Nowhere in the transcript would you find, and he denied the Holocaust, or that, something like that. But that's all implied then.
Right.
I merely defamed the memory of the dead. Anyone in Germany who questions any aspect of the Holocaust
Right.
is defaming the memory of the dead, but only the Jewish memory, not anybody else.
Right. Right.
So this is where the media then runs and says, oh yes, he's a Holocaust denier, he's an anti-Semite. Now, this is why I advise your viewers to follow what Arthur Topham's doing with Gilad Atzmon in Canada at this very moment,
Right.
where Gilad Atzmon clarifies how the politics of being Jewish is what needs to be criticized, but it's deflected by claiming that anyone who criticizes Jewish behavior is an anti-Semite and a racist.
Right.
Remember, Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, said that the Jews are the ones who for the longest time have lived by the principle of race, which they deny to others.
Right.
In other words, you'll find that a lot of people who pull out the race card are Jewish, and they claim then this will stop anyone from looking at their behavior.
Right.
Now, Gilad Atzmon said what I also believe, and I think is a fact, the Jewish person is not, being Jewish is not racist. It's not a race. The Jew is not a race.
Right.
It's not a race.
Right.
And they're trying to genetically prove with this Ashkenazi thing and so on, the Sephardic, and then them growing together in Israel. There's a lot of nonsense going on with the genetic programming of these research institutes that try to prove that being a Jew is a racist element. It's not.
Right.
And once that is accepted, Gilad Atzmon has the answer and says, well, look, you know, being exclusive and all that stuff, that's being racist, that's a political program, that's where we have Zionism.
Right.
So it is one, what could you call it? It is one attempt, the latest attempt at trying to open the discussion on Jewish texts, for example. Germany Must Perish, written by Kaufmann before the war. Other things where it would be that's inciting to hatred. But you can't get these texts into the system. You can't, they're there, and then if you use them, you get accused of being an anti-Semite and a racist.
Right.
If you point out what others have said. Or I know at the moment there is a rabbi, I forget his name, but he really has made terrible statements about what should be done with the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And once we start on that, I mean, this is massive.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's funny how it works the opposite for them. They can criticize everyone else and come after everybody else, but nobody can come after them. That's the problem, you know.
Yeah. The evil person wants to do evil, but actually does good.
Right.
And I look back on my time. If I look back on my dismissal as a teacher, I mean, it was painful. But had this not happened, I would not be speaking with you.
Right.
And what a reward that is.
Right. So you're saying you wouldn't have gotten into revisionism, you mean, or?
Well, this is the point.
Yeah.
This is the point. This is where then once I got registration in South Australia in 92, I then transferred, and in 94 I started teaching again. Imagine how therapeutic that was for me.
Yeah.
Because anyone who gets dismissed is generally blocked in Australia. You don't get a job anymore. Luckily, when I fronted up to that committee of the teacher registration board, 16 people, and I simply said, look, Dr. Boston was involved in my dismissal. I have Mr. Max Smith here, whom Dr. Boston dismissed, and the Supreme Court of South Australia put back into his job as a principal. He could speak out, and the presiding president, she said, Dr. Toben, we're well aware of Dr. Boston's bureaucratic procedures or something like that.
Right.
So my witness fell flat. I didn't have to. I merely talked, I think it was for an hour or so, or I was bombarded with questions and so on, and they granted me teacher registration.
Right.
So, I mean, it was therapy.
Right.
And I was back in the classroom.
Right.
I was back to annoy the kids.
Right. Now, did you retire from teaching then? You retired?
No. Then what happened, for 4 years I did this.
Okay.
But at the same time, it wasn't quite, once you're in teaching for a long time, it's sort of repetition. You still, many teachers, what they do, they do further courses. They get another degree,
Sure.
another this and that and so on. But what I did, I started Adelaide Institute in 94.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that, in 91, we had an incident in Australia called the Australian War Crimes Trials. And they were held in Adelaide because a lot of Eastern Europeans made their home in Adelaide. They ran the furniture industry and bureaucracies and so on. A lot of Eastern Europeans were there. And so the 1991 war crimes trials pushed by Mark Aarons, and that led to my coming to Adelaide and with a number of people protesting for the first time in my life, because up to that point, Jim, it was below my dignity to be protesting. I mean, that's the rebel. You don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's no. But I listened to the arguments, and so I was in this home here, and we, on the kitchen bench, we made posters, and one of them is this one. I don't know whether you can see that.
Okay.
But we wanted to show that we're having war crimes trials, and we had Sir Walter Crocker. He was 85 years old at the time. He was a United Nations fellow. He worked at the United Nations. He was a well-known person. He started at the Australian National University, one of the first professors and so on. He was in at the United Nations with Palestine when it was divided up. He was against the Israelis, or the Jews doing what they did to found Israel and marginalize the Palestinians. He wanted two states, the two-state solution. He knew what was going on. He himself has a Sephardic Jewish background, but he was declared an anti-Semite. They opted into him, and he was pushed out of the portfolio. Later on, as a diplomat, he was also in Nigeria. And of course, I was in Nigeria in 81, 82, where he was also at Minna in that area, and we could relate to what the European powers were doing to the locals. Skip back to 1933 and realize what did Adolf Hitler do? He disconnected from the international IMF
Right.
and from the World Bank. And this is where I found I must say, I prepared myself just a little bit, and I found this quote from Robert Forreston, Le Monde, April 1979. I think he quoted that in his interview. If he didn't, but it's telling.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "The Hitler gas chambers never existed. The genocide of the Jews never took place. Hitler never gave an order or permission that anyone should be killed because of his race or religion. The alleged gas chambers and the alleged genocide are one and the same lie. This lie, which is largely of Zionist origin, has made possible an enormous political and financial fraud whose principal beneficiary is the state of Israel."
Right.
Now, this is massive. Now, that was in 79, and what do we have? What did we have this year? David Cole, the revisionist who went to Auschwitz, and got the confession that Kremer 1 is a reconstruction. In his book, he bags Forreston, Leuchter. I say Leuchter, not Lütscher.
Right.
Leuchter.
Yep.
Leuchter is a chandelier. It's
I know,
this
yeah.
is why Leuchter is actually a bright light. And I think you knew that Ernst Zundel was very proud that he could offer the Führer the Leuchter report on the 20th of April, 1988.
Oh, okay. I'm going out to have lunch with Fred tomorrow.
Well, you mentioned that because that's one thing Ernst Zundel engineered.
Yeah.
He was able to do that.
Yeah.
And now this is important for people to know.
Right.
And the Forreston quote. Now,
Sure.
David Cole in his autobiography, Republican Animal,
Yeah.
Republican Party Animal.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, I read it, I criticized it, and I just found it so disgusting when he went to personal relationships with his women.
Right.
It's just ugly, ugly, ugly.
I know. I don't like that.
And yeah, and did you read it?
Yeah. I didn't like his moral character and how he did things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what are you gonna do?
Yeah. Well, the important thing is that he did set the standard of who the revisionist is.
Yeah.
And of course, he mentioned David Irving, David Cole, and Mark Webber, because all three of them believe in limited gassings. Now,
Right.
we don't do that. In 1999, when I was arrested on the 8th of April in Public Prosecutor Klein's office, I remember I was then taken to a judge, and he said, judges wrote their own notes. They didn't have court reporters as they have in the Anglo world. And he said, well, Mr. Toben, do you want to add anything to it? I said, yes, Your Honor. I would please like to have this included. If ever we find evidence of the homicidal gas chamber, we will be the first ones to publish it. Mm-hmm. No fear, favor. Right. If we find the evidence of the murder weapon, right. And Klein jumped up out of a seat and said, that's not necessary, that's not necessary. I said, my word, I insist on it, because by this time I knew I was done in. Yeah. You can read this in Where Truth is No Defense, I Want to Break Free. I don't have to say much about that. But that was the important point. Mm-hmm. Then, 2 years earlier, 97, I visited Rabbi Abraham Cooper at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And what did he do? We had a good discussion. Right. And then he said, do you question the gassings? And I said, yes, of course I do. I have to know how the murder weapon worked. And he said, well, that's it. He got up, and that was it. Yeah. We walked down the stairways, and at the bottom, Rabbi here was there. I think it was Rabbi here. And he looked at me, and he pointed at, Rabbi Cooper pointed at me and said, that man is honest. That man is honest. To me. Oh, yeah. Now, this is why I could not go along with those three so-called revisionists who say limited gassings, because the evidence is not there. Right. The physical evidence is not there. And I committed myself so many years ago. As I said, I'm willing for example, I met Pressack. I visited Pressack about the gassing and so on. And he admitted to me that were he not to go along with it, at one time his big book, only available under lock and key at the university libraries, he would be ruined as a pharmacist. Right. Yeah, he was more or less of a backdoor revisionist, wasn't he? Kind of like he really believed in it, but he didn't want to give in because it would have affected his life after, right? I guess. He did something else as well. He told me that Klaasfeld contacted him, and in that conversation he said, look, I don't believe in this Holocaust. I say it was a massive massacre. Yeah. So he went away from the Holocaust concept or Shoah concept, and he said, Klaasfeld spat into the phone.
Wow.
So that was the end of his relationship with the Jewish community, well, the Holocaust troop in France.
Right. So what?
And he was dearly hurt because Forrester was mortally wounded by Pressac going to the other side.
Sure. Yeah.
But Pressac regretted it.
Yeah.
And the other thing, he said he had, for example, he had Topf and Zerner, all the archives, he had all the material. Now, when he died, it went to, I don't know whether it went to the Klaasfeld Foundation or somewhere, but it's gone. This is very much what happened when the Mufti of Jerusalem, Al-Hassini, I forget the name again, but when he died in the 70s, his archives in Lebanon, I think he was living in Lebanon, it went to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And of course now we know that they do fabricate documents.
Oh yeah, I'm reading that now.
And of course who put us onto this? Arthur Butts in his The Hoax of the 20th Century, The Donation of Constantine.
Yeah.
So that Arthur Butts pointed out that the Constantine bequest that the Roman Empire was given Christianity, the Christians were given the Roman Empire, that this was on a false document. For many decades, centuries, it was a legal document. These legal documents, if you look up Holocaust denial, there's a whole timeline where they find that the court cases lock up the narrative. Now, this is coming to your question then, how did I get into it? After having confronted my accusers in the education department and overcome them up to a point, I mean, the dismissal destroyed my family, everything. You'll never win that back. But then you don't stop and you don't play the victim. You don't play the victim. You go on. And as I said, the types of people that I've met since, it's been a massive reward.
Right.
I had in Australia, I had John Bennett, Chris Steele, and Jeff Muir, the three who were the beginners of revisionism here. Why John Bennett? Because in '79 he was at a conference and Bradley Smith was there as well, and he handed him material. So Bennett says, he started Bradley Smith off. But who started Bradley and Bennett off? Willis Carto. There we have the Carto Empire coming in. In '79 he started the IHR. And I won't go much into it, but the point is, Willis died recently.
Right.
We had a tribute, an obituary for him.
Yeah.
And for me, the important thing was that Willis and Elizabeth Carter were a couple, were a team.
Right.
Male and female. The ideal. In some respects, the ideal. I failed in this. But my twin brother, he's still at it. And so he's 40 years with the same woman.
Wow.
And that's where I get into my personal moral framework, where I say, because a lot of people who are into this King Solomon stuff, where they say, King Solomon, we have to rebuild King Solomon's temple. That's why they're digging under the Al-Aqsa Mosque now, because they want to collapse that and rebuild King Solomon's temple. Well, I had a big clash with a Christian who was a Freemason and all that, and he said King Solomon had 2,000 wives and 500 concubines, and I said, that's disgusting. That's a slave system.
No.
I said, I'm like Wagner, or I'm like the Germans, the Germanics, the Tacitus, when he wrote up the history of the Roman Empire, he talked about the German people there. He said they're odd people. They only have one wife.
Huh.
And in other words, you had more energy to build something, to create. But if you have 2 or 3 wives, hey, that's a full-time job. One is a full-time job. The important point is the moral framework. You do not become like your oppressors.
Right.
And this I've tried to do for a long, long time. I've had to endure a lot of rubbish, a lot of stuff hitting me all the time, legally and in publicity and so on. And I always said, because I've been accused of being a hater, this Deborah Lipstack, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
Hater. And I said, no, we must not become like them, because then we are just like them.
Right.
And that's the categorical imperative, the Kantian categorical imperative. You act in such a way that your actions can become a universal law.
Right.
So don't kill, don't cheat, because you don't want to be cheated, you don't want to be killed.
Right.
And that's always been my burden in some ways, because I know there are loved ones, I have people who have supported me for many years, and they just don't understand how I've survived this stress.
Right.
And this is how it's done. Now and again it was, I do say that I did have an affair with a man. His name was Johnny Walker. Mm-hmm. And then the answer is red, black, or green label. Or double black. So, in other words,
Yeah.
Drinking alcohol did help up to a point.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't help anymore.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't solve the problem. And so what helps it is digesting. I used to be a diarist. I up to 99, I would write a daily diary.
Ah.
Up to that time, going back as a teacher, everything. And in 99, I then said, no, that's the end now. Now my diary will be a book. And that was then my first book on revisionism, Where Truth is No Defense. I want to break free.
Right.
And so now I try to put one out each year, but it hasn't happened because not that much happens in revisionism.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to get it going, you know. We're trying here to get this going by interviewing all the revisionists. Our thing is called the League of Extraordinary Revisionists. So you're part of that now, and we're trying to see if we can get the younger people to see what has happened and the things that you went through, so that we can inspire them to maybe take up the shield and move on here. That's what we hope to do.
Yes, and we've got young people in Australia. Now, one thing though I do explain to them is that the revisionist Holocaust matter will be over. We don't know when, but it'll break. Because, and then what is left? The basic principle of natural justice, of giving someone a right of reply,
Right.
of free expression, and not to fall into this trap. What's his name? Who divided free expression to free speech and hate speech.
Right.
That's no good. Free speech, hate speech. Oh, hate speech is that which I don't like.
Right.
No. Free expression means you say anything in a civilized way.
Right.
And we're being stifled through this political correctness.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, we agree with you.
Because it's not black and white, it's not left or right.
Right. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we're dealing with the same stuff here, you know. Is there anything, we'll probably have to start winding down here. What do you have planned for,
right.
What do you have planned for the future?
What I wanted to do is the way I came into it, I did mention
Okay, go ahead.
that in the war crimes trials came up,
Okay.
and in 91, and this led me into, as I said, the first time to protest on a number of occasions. I was the only one there holding a sign, protesting at the injustice of anyone being had for war crimes. And we had this Mark Ahrens, who was the publicist behind the scene. His father was a communist. And Mark then, what he did, he went to the Ukrainian town where this Ivan Polyukovich used to live, and he went around with a picture and said, "Oh, do you remember this man?" And they did. And of course the village was divided. Why was it divided? because Ivan Pavlyukovic's first wife was Maria. He left her and came to Australia and met another wife, another woman, married her and stayed with her. Her name was also Maria. Now, that was bad blood in that village, and they tried to get into that. That's what they do. And this is where, if you look at my 11 points of how to eliminate, you go into the person's environment and you spread defamation. And that's what Mark Ahrens did.
Right.
And when it came to a trial, you had witnesses flown in from the Ukraine, staying in Adelaide at the Hilton for 4 weeks. They all came back after that. They could build themselves 2-story homes at home. Yeah. That's how profitable it was.
Right.
And so that's the side issue. But also, when the time came, the jury was sent to, the court went to Ukraine and dug up a grave and found a bullet, and they found a gun, a pistol, and they tried to match it up and tried to say, well, that bullet belonged to Pavlyukovic. Nonsense like that.
Right.
Then it went further. There was a scene where the witness said to the judge, yes, I saw him walking the column of Jews into the woods. What distance? 700 meters. And what did you notice anything else? The public prosecutor said, yes, he had an armband. At 700 meters, you can't see.
Right.
So the next question wasn't followed up by saying, it was a swastika.
Right.
And then the final thing, his first wife gave witness, and that was the crucial thing, whether he wore a jacket, which he had worn when he walked the prisoners, or some other thing, or whether he wore this at the wedding, something like that. She could have condemned him, but she told the truth and said no. Right. And that the whole case collapsed.
Yeah.
Another case, an American, the second one, Wagner, I think it was, or the other one, there were 3 fellows who were taken to court. The one witness was asked to identify the accused. He was in this box, but the witness pointed to someone in the audience, and he said, that man. And later on the front page of the advertiser it had, I'm not guilty. He was a tourist from America just attending the court case. That's how absurd it became.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Once that happened, I then, in 94, I started, and then in 97, by 96, they were on to us, because Abraham Cooper said, there's a website, Nazi website and all that stuff. I did my first revisionist trip. I met a lot of revisionists and non-revisionists. I met Michael Shermer and Cooper, and I tried to go into the enemy's camp. But one of my principles is no guilt by association.
Yeah.
You must not feel guilty if you associate with a crook. You've got your own integrity,
right.
But you may learn something from the crook, or you have to associate with people if you want to find out the truth.
Right.
So that was 97. In 99, I did the same, and I'd met the public prosecutor in Mannheim before, so this time I visited him again, and he said, what did you notice? Any difference in your research? I said, yes. Instead of having the gas insertion holes on the Kramer 2 like that, opposite 2 like that, they're now just in one line. He said, yes. And then he stood up and said, well, I'm now arresting you. So that was it. And of course in that was 99, but 98 we had the big symposium.
Yeah.
Our conference where we brought in people from all over the world. We're thinking of doing Adelaide Institute. Peter Hartong, he's running the show, has been since 2009. He's thinking of putting on a revisionist conference. We need something like that. We can do it electronically now. You know, look at this. Isn't this marvelous?
Yeah.
If we have a conference where we can talk, I mean, it's tremendous.
Right.
And they can't stop us.
Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, Willis Carter with his IHR, starting the IHR, I must say this again publicly, had things gone right, we would have had our tertiary institution.
Wow.
The Institute for Historical Review would have had degree granting status, but sabotage always comes in. And you can see, you'll find that, well, look, you found it with your own work.
Yeah.
Just briefly mention how you were attacked.
Well, I mean, I have cable shows I put on in my town, and they basically just took them off the air because I didn't like the topic. And I get banned everywhere. I'm banned on YouTube, banned on Facebook. I mean, every which way. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happened to me. So I mean, you know, that's why I'm trying to get this going now again in a different angle. We'll see what we can do. You know, that's all. I mean, it's tough. It's not easy. You know?
Yeah, but it shows that you can relate to what's happened to me.
Oh,
you
yeah.
can relate to yourself.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and then, Jim, the important thing is, and this is the message for the young, do not think it's anything particular, it's special. This is life.
Yeah.
We have to fight. But we have to retain a moral framework.
Right.
We must know what is right and wrong. We must oppose those who prevent us from speaking the truth,
Right.
who try to prevent us from delving into something like this assertion. Look, what I wanted to do, I hope we've got the time. This is a letter that yesterday I looked for some material that I could use, and I found this. It's from Werner Fischer. He's a German who came out in, well, the letter, it's written to Dr. Patricia Edgar, Chairman of the Advisory Commission, Australian Broadcasting Control Board, 30 September 1975. Dear Madam, as a German migrant to this country since 1953, I wish to make a strong protest regarding the almost daily vilification, defamation, and outright slander against the German people, in particular the German soldier, on Australian TV programs. To invite people to come here to work and settle, and then confront them continuously with such insults, is, in my view, to put it mildly, bad manners. I cannot help wondering about the attitude of the responsible leaders of this country, who are, so it seems, always on guard and vociferous when people of other races and creeds are concerned. Do they really believe, as it was propagated already in World War I, and what proved to be so detrimental to the earlier settlers, that we Germans are devoid of any human feelings, that we are some kind of monsters with wooden hearts, have no self-respect and no pride in our heritage? What a nerve it must take to borrow constantly millions of dollars from our kinsmen in West Germany, in the knowledge of the fact that this vicious anti-German hate propaganda takes place here day by day, year in, year out, with ever-increasing ferocity. I often ask myself, and so do many others, what have we Germans done to this country to deserve such an unfair treatment? Many of my countrymen are afraid to say anything publicly for fear of reprisals, or they resign themselves to the belief that nothing can be done about it, because we have lost the war. Children come home from school asking their fathers, are all Germans barbarians? Even whilst I am writing this letter, it is past 10 p.m., some dangerous former Nazi scientist is being chased on Channel 10, which together with this local Channel 9 is one of the most proficient propagators of virulent Germanophobia. Do those responsible leaders regard German migrants simply as objects to harvest their capacity for hard work, to take advantage of the industriousness and skills? Has anyone ever bothered to find out why so many German migrants are reluctant to take out Australian citizenship? years ago, we were told that series such as Hogan's Heroes, Combat, and many others of the same caliber were going to be discontinued. Yet they are still being shown together with a completely biased so-called documentary series, World at War, which is riddled with ridiculous allegations and falsifications and give the viewer a grossly distorted, one-sided picture of the historical events of that time. If the World War II theme is so popular, why not show the authentic film made by the German authorities of the devastating air raid on the ancient city of Dresden on the 13th, 14th of February 1945, where more people were killed than in Hiroshima and Nagasaki together. It was reported that this film would be too horrible to be shown to the public at large. This I can well imagine, having had personal experience of many air raids, including a 1,000-bomber raid on Berlin, etc. Human suffering, so it seems to me, has been monopolized. Also recommended for TV is a fairly objective 3-part series on the much defamed Waffen-SS, which was last year produced in West Germany. If no action is forthcoming by the responsible authorities to stop the anti-German propaganda war in this country in the near future, Germans in Australia will have to organize themselves and fight for their rights, the right to live here in this blessed country, unmolested and free of such moral degradation on TV, and 1,000-fold in paperback, book form, as well as in magazines and the news media in general. For politicians to turn up at local German beer fests, having their picture taken with a Stein in hand and saying a few niceties is just not good enough. I sincerely hope you can assist us to make Australia a better place for German migrants to live in, as well as for our own sake. Respectfully yours, Werner Fischer.
Nice, yeah.
Says it all.
Yeah, it does. Have you ever heard of the book The Myth of German Villainy? Have you heard that book?
No.
It's called The Myth. The book is called The Myth of German Villainy. It's by Benton Bradbury. You might want to look into that book. It's an excellent book that deals with that. The Myth of German Villainy. All right, I'll do that. I'll send it to you in a link so that you can take a look at it. I read that probably a couple of weeks ago. It was an excellent book about how the Germans have been villainized, and it explained the whole situation from the middle 1800s all the way up until now, and how it all started, World War I, World War II, the whole 9 yards.
It goes into an email I just got the other day about somebody summing up how the Poles have been treating the Germans from the 18s onwards.
Sure.
And then, of course, this links in with the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan that has the aim of destroying Europe as a European white continent, and which with the influx of immigrants, that's one way. The other way is by having civil war. And of course, this is what's happened. Divide and rule, divide and conquer. The Germans are, in some respects, stupid, naive, believing. See, I was in the German prison for 7 months, and there weren't many Germans there. 80% of them were foreigners. In other words, most Germans are God-fearing. They believe in order. They believe in basic things. And then when somebody says, "Oh, but they didn't do anything about the Holocaust," and then of course the answer the response is, "Well, show me or draw me the homicidal gas chamber, or no holes, no Holocaust," as Forreston would say.
Right.
I mean, he has, and David Cole belittles this and says Forreston, Zundel, and Leuchter didn't produce anything. 1988, and I must say this is very important, 1988, it was the last time that a witness was cross-examined about the factuality of the Holocaust assertions. 1988. From then on, they changed the laws, and it became a watered down defamation law.
Right.
And that's where we're at the moment.
Right.
But the big thing now is we have to agree that the Holocaust happened, because there are so many narratives, so many stories. They keep on changing. I remember in 94, Deborah Lipset came to Australia, and there was something, it was something completely new. She said something I'd never heard. Mm-hmm. So I rang up Forreston, I rang up Zundel, and they said, the story keeps on changing.
Right, right.
And that's what's been happening.
Yeah.
The narrative changes. So if you focus on the Jewish generated narrative, it jumps all over the place.
Sure, yeah.
And that's what we're doing. We're looking at the narrative from 4 million to 1 million to whatever.
Right.
And of course, and it's we can't do much if the laws are not opened up, if the academics are not intimidated anymore.
Right.
I remember Wilhelm Steglich, the one who wrote the Auschwitz Myth, the German judge.
I'm reading that book. I'm reading that book right now.
Yeah, I visited him a few times. He said, look, he gave me that idea that this, the watered down version of defamation.
Yeah.
But he said, 100 judges, if they refuse to act, the thing falls flat. Günther Deckert was freed by 2 judges in the 90s when he was taken to court, and there was an uproar. The 2 judges, one became sick, the other one resigned, and then they brought in other judges, and then they knocked him over, and he spent 5+ years. I visited him.
Wow.
In jail in 99, I think it was.
Right,
I visited him as well.
Wow.
So this is the point, that this is where you can't say the guts of the people, but certainly the courage or the integrity of the people has to come to the fore again.
Sure.
Most push away, and this is being pushed through now. There are now the Gutmenschen, it's called in German, the good do-gooders. They're opening their homes to all these refugees, and what happens? They come in by trains, they come in by buses, and what do they leave behind? One thing: filth.
Right.
They leave behind terrible conditions.
I know, yeah.
And this is where the German differentiates himself from others. Flippantly, one talks about polnische Wirtschaft, meaning that it is not as exact as the Germans. I couldn't quite live in Germany. I think I wouldn't measure up to the standards they have there. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
You sweep the trottoir, you sweep the sidewalk, you do all these things, and if you don't, the neighbors will look and they'll tell you, you didn't do that.
Right.
Everybody's
henpecking you.
But that's a community.
Right.
But it makes for civilization. And to claim that this highly civilized community of Germans, highly intellectual, highly cultured, exterminated, I just go back to Forreston's statement of 79, and I'm not allowed to say that because I would be in contempt of court. But I quote. See, what I've said, I'm quoting others.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to.
All right.
No, I've got a gag order.
Okay, I understand.
So we see, but with the internet, and I think I just hope that the younger generation. We have Samson, we have John, friend, we have Eric, we have Josh,
right,
and well, we have you.
Well, we're trying.
And Brandon.
You're right.
And Brandon Martinez, and so on.
Yeah.
There are a number of them coming through.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all the old fuddy-duddies.
Yeah. Well, I'm old too, so don't worry about that. Those kids, they could be my kids. Some of those guys. John Friend, he'd be my son. He could be my son.
And And do they enjoy it? Do they like it?
Oh no, I met John this weekend. I went to that tribute in Washington, and it was great meeting these folks. I mean, these young people, and I hope to see that he continues on. You know, to do what he's doing. He's doing a good job.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, my son's in New York, so I don't know whether he'll get the American New York air, and I don't think he'd like to come back to Australia. He'd find it rather boring here then. Yeah. Nothing's going on.
How old is your son?
He's 30, I think about 35.
Oh, okay. All right.
34.
All right, young kid, yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So, I mean, they do their own, they're into IT, they do their own thing.
Right.
And let's hope the guilt of the father doesn't pass on to the son, this kind of thing. Because with my father, he would never talk about these things. For him, he gave us a basic outline. He said, for him, family is holy. Right. See, we are not, my mother was Catholic, she came from Austria, my father, North German. We go back 300 years as farmers. And the North Germans are very much like the English. Mm-hmm. And not the Scottish are a little more active than the English. But, I think it's the weather. But the Southerners, they have that esprit. And my mother had that. Yeah. And so, I mean, can you imagine a young woman at 16 and a half comes to a village, and the man is, she's 5'2", and he is 6 foot. 5'2", eyes are blue. She's green. and father 6 foot, blonde, blue-eyed, and all his friends said, "Oh, there's a new cow in the village." That's how primitive they were.
Yeah.
The new cow was my mother. That kind of talk, but
yeah.
he couldn't fight her, and he loved her for a lifetime.
Right.
We came to Australia, we assimilated.
Right, I know.
And I remember this, one fellow said, he was a sociologist, and he believed in class thinking. For me, class thinking is false consciousness. Class thinking is nonsense. But he said, because he was an academic, he said he belongs to the upper middle class. Also, he belonged to the High Church of England. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I don't believe in this class thinking. But if I do, then I'm a farmer's son, peasant farmer's son, so I belong to the lower upper class. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, you're just a bloody migrant. So whichever way they turn, and truth is not a guiding light. Right. It's what's, as I said, the hand and the mind have to work together.
Right. Sure.
And how are we going for time?
Oh no, well we probably gonna have to wind down. Maybe you can mention your website. You can mention your book. You mentioned a book in the beginning. I want you to mention that again. Your website. You can mention. I'll put that up.
I would just try this.
Oh, okay. Thought Criminal. Oh, all right. That's new. I don't see that. Thought Criminal did get in. I can't read it.
It's called Die Gedanken sind frei.
Okay.
Essentially, if we talk about my books, on the website is www.toben, TOBEN.biz or BIZ.
Okay. All right. .biz. Okay. I got it.
Yeah, that's the website. Now I've got all my books on there.
Okay. Good.
They're published there for free. I'm getting to the stage at my age. I cannot read too much on the internet. I still like reading a book hardcover.
I do too. I read a lot. Yeah.
And I heard on Amazon that they are re-establishing bookshops.
Yeah.
So that's a good sign.
Okay. Oh, there you go. That's a good thing. All right.
So
well, we'll check out. Like I said, I'll put your website up there, and hopefully people will go to it. Is there anything else you'd like to say to conclude? Our conversation. Anything?
I'm just looking at my thing, to demonize the Holocaust deniers. I've got a new one. I'm a nutter.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Then haters, the old ones: Holocaust denier, anti-Semite, racist, Nazi, xenophobe. That xenophobe is coming through.
Yeah.
Because if you're fearful of strangers,
Sure, yeah.
and of course shouldn't be fearful of strangers, but certainly a community. This is why I'm against multiculturalism, because it disintegrates any viable community, not where money rules and where money is the glue that sticks everything together, must have a core culture.
Right.
And in Australia, as far as I'm concerned, it's still 70% Anglo-Australian.
Wow.
Therefore, that is the core culture.
Right.
In time, in 40 years' time, maybe, because the Anglo-Australians are riding or running with the multicultural element, with the Marxist feminist element of one world, internationalism,
Sure.
no nationalism. And as far as I'm concerned, nationalism is a priority in order to fulfill our human potential.
Right.
And this is the problem. If we break down, and the Kudinov-Kalergi plan has Barbara Spector, if you're familiar with that clip.
Yeah, I saw that clip, yeah.
Yeah, she says it outright. What they want is a browning of Europe,
Yeah.
so that Eurasia is gone, or that Eurasia is no match for America. America is supreme and runs the show by the Zionists. Of course, they're in charge. But what's happening now? The battle between the American and Russian entities is over Germany.
Right.
Germany is still the core in Europe.
Right.
Unfortunately, the Germans, with their stupid wish to work hard and to be clean and to be inventive and to be uncomfortable and to be nasty and to be all sorts of things, thinking too much, these Germans are the prize for Europe.
Right.
And the ones who control Germany control Europe.
Right.
And Russia, I'm in favor of Germany going with Russia.
Yeah.
Because there is far more at stake, because Russia has beautiful, massive raw material, and the German mind would love to be tinkering away at that task.
Right.
And the Russian people are wonderful people. By the way, this is the other point when you talk about Adolf Hitler and his racist theory and so on. This degradation, it was a fight between communism, Bolshevism, Talmudism, not against the people as such, as a race. And I think we had a recent clip of a New York taxi driver. Where was he from? Somewhere. And he called himself a National Socialist. And he lost his job.
Right.
But he was berailed. He said, "How dare you? Didn't you know that they didn't like the blacks or what?" He said, "No, that's not true. Anyone can be a National Socialist."
Right.
And so he's proud to be one.
Sure, yeah.
And of course, we have that story about the meeting with Hitler and
Jesse Owens?
Jesse Owens.
Yeah.
He never really met him, but the point is, afterwards, but the point is, there was no antipathy. I remember when I went to Nigeria, some said, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "Australia." And originally I said, "Germany." "Oh, aren't you a racist?" I said, "What do you mean, racist? I was a racist." They loved me, the students loved me in Nigeria.
Right.
I was called Baba Naira.
Yeah.
Naira was the denomination of the money.
Oh.
And I went to the US Embassy in Kano, and they loaded me up with all sorts of books.
Wow.
And I brought them back and I dished them out to them.
Wow.
And they loved the books.
Wow.
And, I must say this as well. When I heard that the Nigerians were into the email scamming, I said, serves the world right, because they've been had for so long,
Right.
and they learnt the lesson from
Right.
others.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
this idea of saying one race is better than another, that's a lot of nonsense.
I know, I understand.
As it is with the Jews saying that they're chosen people.
Right.
Hagi is wrong, and the other fellows, the Christian Zionists, are wrong when they talk that kind of nonsense.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Very good. Well, listen, we're going to have to cut it off here because I try to keep these around 2 hours. It's hard to do that sometimes. Right. But, I appreciate at least we had the time to talk. You've been through a lot in your life. There's no doubt about it. I hope you can hang in there. I know you probably have to do some more, right? Deal with some more issues coming your way. But I hope you stand strong. And we in the United States are trying to, again, get this movement going, the League of Extraordinary Revisionists going. And you're part of that. And we hope to do more interviews with other people like yourself to get the message out. So, we do appreciate that. So, Fredrick, I really enjoy talking with you. And maybe we could do it another time.
Thank you, Jim. I think what you're doing is an excellent idea, especially because of the communication facilities that are now available to us. Truth will emerge. We will, in time, be free. It may not be in our time. Wilhelm Stekely said he will not see it through. Robert Forreston thinks he won't make it. It doesn't matter. It's on the record now. We're on the record, and it's for the record that we speak, not for some self-gratification or whatever. We are doing it so that the younger generation knows what we've been through, and they will then realize when that test comes that they do not despair, that they will then, in the long run, realize this is part of being alive.
That's right.
Of fighting for truth, honor, justice, love, and above all, for beauty.
There you go. Couldn't say it any better than that, Fredrick. All right, thank you very much.
You.
All right, we'll see you. We'll talk to you later. All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Regards, Diane.
All right, bye now.